Welcome to God Delusion number 13. We are starting chapter 4, which is entitled Why There Almost Certainly Is No God. And as we go through here, we're going to see that if you thought Dawkins was crazy already, you'll think that he's really a religious nut by the time you start getting to chapter 4. Because he readily admits that what he believes is very, very improbable. And we'll get to that as we get there. The first thing he does, he says at the end of chapter 3 that in chapter 4 he will use the argument, who made God, to show that God does not exist. So far in the first 30 pages of chapter 4, he has not made that argument yet. He does start off with what he calls the ultimate Boeing 747, which is what he labels God. So God is now an airplane. I didn't know that, but according to Dawkins, he is.
So he's fast and reliable. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good compliment.
Well, he's even better than the regular Boeing 747 because he's the ultimate.
Yeah.
But he says, quote, the argument from improbability properly deployed comes close to proving that God does not exist, end quote. Basically what he's going to do in this chapter is he's going to show that life on earth is improbable. That's why he says the argument from improbability. And because of that, he's going to, by showing that it is improbable that life would exist on this planet. Therefore, God does not exist. So in other words, he's been telling us all this time about how irrational religion is. That it's not based upon knowledge, science, fact. It's all based upon fairy tale, which we've already shown is not the case. And yet he's going to build his argument that God does not exist, not upon rational thinking, but upon improbability. And we'll get more into that as we go. So that right there shows you how ludicrous this chapter is going to be. He says, quote, Darwinian natural selection is the only known solution to the otherwise unanswerable riddle of where the information comes from. End quote. So right away he has dismissed intelligent design. Basically what he's saying is that that creationists say that there are two possible ways of life existing on this planet. One is God designed it. Two is it happened by chance. And that by chance is very highly unlikely, just because things that and we've already talked about this, things that randomly come into existence, if things are just by chance, it wouldn't by chance have a head, an eye, a hand, and all the things working together, in an animal and a human, and everything here wouldn't happen by chance. Therefore, there must be an intelligent design. And what Dawkins says is, first off, he automatically dismisses the idea that there could be an intelligent designer, a God. He gets rid of that right away without providing any proof or any argument really against there being a designer. He just says that Bible believers are crazy, end of story. And then what he says is chance. Of course, this stuff, life couldn't have happened by chance. So then what he says is Darwinian natural selection is the only known solution to the otherwise unanswerable riddle of where the information comes from. So he's dismissed God, and then he says chance is incorrect. So really the way everything came about is by Darwinian natural selection. He says, quote, Darwinianism teaches us to be wary of the easy assumption that design is the only alternative to chance, and teaches us to seek out graded ramps of slowly increasing complexity, end quote. So in other words, what he's going to do is he's rejected God, or the ultimate Boeing 747, and he's replaced it with what he's going to call Mount Improbable, meaning that everything that happened is improbable, that all this stuff really happened, but the fact that we're here shows that it must have happened by natural selection. Since we've dismissed God as a possible, we've dismissed God as the possible creator, and we dismiss chance because it couldn't have happened by chance. So then what he does is he creates the religion of Darwinian natural selection, which says that all of this stuff could not have happened right with it. Basically, he's dismissing the idea of a Big Bang. He's saying that all this just didn't happen, poof, it happened. What ended up happening was everything slowly evolved over time. And so that's what he calls these graded ramps of slowly increasing complexity. So yeah, a human could not have been created just poof by chance. But a human eye could have formed over billions of years. A human hand could have formed over billions of years. A human immune system could have formed over billions of years. And then we put all this stuff together, and now we've got the human. So, chance, no, but Darwinian natural selection, oh yeah, that could happen. It's improbable, but it could happen, is what he's saying. Again, as we've said before, this takes a lot more. This is not rational. When you think that something is improbable, you're not thinking rationally. Like we've used the example of a lottery. Winning the lottery is far more likely than Darwinian natural selection. And yet, it is so improbable that many people dismiss that from happening. They won't even buy a lotto ticket, or they'll buy a lotto ticket knowing it's highly improbable, but they'll still do it just because they've got that slight chance. They know, everybody who buys a lotto ticket or doesn't buy a lotto ticket knows that there's a very, 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 very good chance that they will not win the lotto by buying that one lotto ticket. But they do it anyway. This is, so in other words, a rational thinking. If you use your rationale to say, will I win the lotto by buying this ticket? Everybody who does that and looks at it rationally would say, no, I will not win the lotto by buying this ticket. So they do it based upon their emotion and the chance, the very, very slight chance. So what Dawkins does is he does the same thing, except this, the natural selection and how life came about, is far more improbable than winning the lotto. And yet he says, well, since life is here, and since we know that there is no God who designed us, then this very, very, very unlikely event of natural selection must be how we came about. Because even though it's very unlikely, there is still just a slight chance that natural selection took place. And that's the only thing we have. Because there is no God, so he didn't create us, and it couldn't have happened by chance, so it must be natural selection. So he makes Darwinianism, natural selection, his God. But again, that's not based on rational thinking. That's based on, just like the person with the lotto. The person buying the lotto ticket doesn't rationally think it out. He just says, well, I've got a chance, so I'll go for it. And that's pretty much what Charles Darwin did. He created this natural selection and said, there's a chance, so I'll go for it. And this is how, it's not rational thinking, it's, well, it could have happened this way, so it must have happened this way, is the idea. But as we get along in this, actually this Darwinian natural selection, as he explains it more, what we're going to find is that it is even less likely than chance. And we'll see that as we go on. So he says, so basically he says, well, yeah, everything couldn't have happened by chance at once, but if we break it down into all these billions and trillions scenarios, each individual thing, the formation of an eye. Certainly the formation of a human right away, boom, that wouldn't happen because that's by chance. But the formation of an eye, well, that's a lot more likely to happen because it's less complex than the entire human body. So then if we can believe that the eye formed by chance, although we won't use the word chance, we'll use Darwinianism, natural selection. Yeah, because it's not chance, because we rejected chance. It's Darwinian natural selection. So basically, what the difference between chance and Darwinian natural selection is that chance says everything happened at once, and that can't happen. And Darwinian natural selection says, well, everything happened by chance to form the eye. Everything by chance happened to form the hand. Everything by chance happened to form the arm. Everything by chance happened to form the immune system. And everything by chance happened to put everything together. So he's just breaking down chance into its components, but what he's really doing is he's analyzing and showing how complex, by doing so, by breaking it into the components, he's showing how complex the human body is, or anything that God made. And then rational thinking would say, well, this certainly isn't true then, because now that I've thought about it and seen how complex it is, then certainly this can't be true. But instead, he grabs onto his little, what he calls Mount Improbability. It was improbable that the eye formed, but it did. It was improbable that the hand formed, but it did. It was improbable that the immune system formed, but it did. And it's improbable that everything is put together, but that happened, so that's what happened. So you can see how ridiculous this is. He says, quote, an eagle's eye was really the end product of a long sequence of non-random but purely natural causes, end quote. So we have the idea of where we say, well, if there's no creator, then everything happened by chance or randomness. Well, he says it's non-random. Well, how is it a long sequence of non-random? Well, if it's non-random, then there must have been some design to it. There must have been a creator. So then, who created it? But I always thought the Big Bang was this random event where all these particles just randomly came together and boom, the Big Bang happens and here we are. Well, he's saying, well, no, an eagle's eye or a dragonfly's wing or just this small component is really the end product of a long sequence of non-random but purely natural causes. So he's saying there's no creator, that it's natural selection, it's natural causes. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it's non-random, that right there tells you, if he admits that it's the end product of a long sequence of non-random causes, if it's non-random, then there had to be a creator or something that put it together. Well, he says it's not a creator, it's natural causes. Well, then the natural causes are a creator. There is, I guess what he's saying is there's some kind of law. There's the law of Darwinianism, natural selection. Well, if there is a law, how did that law come about? The law takes away the randomness or the chance and puts it together. So the very fact that this law exists, the Darwinian natural selection, by his own admission, Darwin is saying that there must be a creator, because the law couldn't just happen by chance. The law is something fixed that he's saying that brings these particles together to create the eagle's eye. So then Darwinian natural selection is his God. It is the creator. He may not say there is a supreme being, an intelligent designer who put it together, but the very fact that he says that there is a law of natural selection that caused these events to be non-random to produce the eagle's eye means that evolution or natural selection is God. And then the question is, of course, who created the law of natural selection? There has to be a creator of the law to bring order to disorder. So then there must be a God. But if he says there is no God, then by his own admission, the law of natural selection is his God. He's going to go into, this area of what he calls evolutionary biology. He quotes somebody here, I found this interesting. It comes from a book by Douglas Adams called The Salmon of Doubt. And he says in his book, quote, "I'd take the awe of understanding over the awe of ignorance any day," end quote. So he's saying we have the awe of understanding how life formed by the evolutionary process of natural selection. And that is much better than the awe of ignorance which religion has. But what he's failing to understand is, I'd say precisely, I would take the awe of understanding over the awe of ignorance any day as well. And that's exactly what I'm doing by understanding that there is a God who created everything. That is the awe of understanding. A God creating everything makes much more sense than what he's talking about. The mount of improbability and going up that mound, and by each thing, everything was non-random and happened over billions of years, and then somehow the eagle's eye was made, but then it had to be attached to the wings, and the wing was also very improbable, but somehow it formed, and then every little part was very improbable, but somehow it happened. And so what he's done is, I made the example when we started this video here, that the idea of a Big Bang is like hitting the lotto, except much more improbable. And what he's doing then is saying, well, yeah, all this stuff happening by chance at once is just, it couldn't happen. But it could happen if every little part, because the eagle's eye forming by itself is much more likely than the whole body of the eagle forming. Well, yeah, that's true. But what he's doing then is he's not saying there's one in an infinite amount of chance of this whole world being created. He's saying there's 1 in a trillion chance of the eagle's eye, 1 in a trillion chance of the wing, 1 in a trillion chance of the feathers, 1 in a trillion chance of the claw, 1 in a trillion chance of the mouth, and all these little pieces are 1 in a trillion chance. And then, but yet all of them happened, and now we've got this eagle. Well, if you add up 1 in a trillion times 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 1 in a trillion, you come up with a much greater improbability than you started with, because you've analyzed everything. You said, wow, yeah, the eagle's eye, that really would be very, very highly unlikely. Wow, the eagle's wing, very, very highly unlikely. The eagle's claw, very, very highly unlikely. Well, what's the chances that all of those things actually formed, and then all of them somehow miraculously were put together in one fully functioning unit? Well, it's a lot more improbable than what I originally thought, because originally I was just thinking of one event of life being created. But now you've broken it down to all these pieces, so yeah, now it's really unlikely. There's no way that could happen. So why would he call that the awe of understanding over the awe of ignorance? There's no understanding there. You just created more confusion by looking at the detail and say, well, yeah, I thought that one event of the Big Bang, that was pretty improbable. But now that you've explained all the details of what would happen, well, certainly, there's no way I would believe that. But a God creating everything? Oh, that's much more likely. That makes a lot more sense now. Thank you for going to the detail that you did, evolutionary biologist, to prove that your theory is incorrect. Because there were just so many details and complexities that I didn't even think about. So thanks for pointing that out for me. So now I know for sure, 100% certainty that you are wrong. And I would take the awe of understanding over the awe of ignorance any day. Therefore, thank you for proving that evolution is incorrect. And thank you for enlightening me that I need to read the Bible and understand what God told me about His creation, so that I can have understanding rather than ignorance. So in doing this, and following evolutionary biology, what they're doing is they're showing that there is a God. He says, quote, geology reminds us of our brief existence, both as individuals and as a species. I find that interesting because they use these billions of years to say everything evolved. Well, they're taking this as fact. How do they know that this rock was formed 3 billion years ago and this other rock was formed 500 million years ago? It's such an abstract concept because the longest living person is going to live maybe 100, maybe 110 years. To think in millions and billions of years, we just can't comprehend that because we've never experienced such a large span of time. And so to come up with a system to explain this is hundreds of millions of years, I find it fascinating that whenever evolutionists try to explain something in creation, they say these things with such certainty. This waterfall formed 10 million years ago. The Grand Canyon formed 3 billion years ago. This formed 500 million years ago. You haven't lived more than 100 years and you're trying to tell me you know with certainty the millions and billions of years? All this is completely made up. There's no way to determine millions and billions because we haven't been around that long to figure that out. So when he says, well, we've just been in brief existence in time and space, you know, that's a geological scale is completely made up. And also, even if all that is true and somehow we were able to determine 10 million years and 500 million and 3 billion, that also doesn't take away the existence of God. God could have created things to look older than other things. Look at somebody's house, for example, somebody who is an interior decorator. They will probably paint their walls and want the paint to be very modern looking, very new looking. But yet in that room with those very modern paint, they've also bought an antique desk that makes it look old. As the designer of that room, this person wants things that look modern, but they also want things that look older to get a variety. Well, if God created the world as an intelligent designer of the world, wouldn't it make sense that he would make some things to look older and some things to look more modern, just to have that creativity there? Wouldn't that show a creative God that he would make a river that appears to be 10 million years old and make this other rock that appears to be 500 million years old and create that all right now at the time, just like that interior designer, interior decorator creates a room right now, but makes part of it appear 100 years old, another part 10 years old, another part brand new. If that's what we do and we are made in the image of God, then why wouldn't God do that as well? So first off, this geological time scale is completely made up. We don't have any evidence for it. But even if it's true, it proves the existence of God more than it proves the existence of evolution. That God is not a boring God who just creates one thing. He's got design, he's got plan behind it, and he makes things beautiful by making them look older or newer. And then he quotes theologians in here as well to support his ideas, but these theologians are not Bible believers, so we don't even need to listen to them. We're going to listen to the Word of God rather than theologians. Okay, we're out of time right now. Next time we'll take up the topic of irreducible complexity. That's his next topic.